Well, good Thursday morning. Good to be with you this morning. Glad you've joined us here again this week for a little bit of a look into the book of Joshua. We're basically kind of in chapter 4 and a little bit in chapter 5, and we're talking about what Gilgal was. Where in the world was Gilgal? It's not a place, like I said, that we often think about or talk about. It's not like the walls of Jericho or things like that. Gilgal is a place that is often left unthought about as we study the Word. But when we see Joshua picking up the mantle of Moses and beginning to lead the people and listening to God, we find that Gilgal became a very, very important place in the life of Israel. And we've talked already that it was a place of remembrance, that we remember things there that God's done with us and for us, kind of like looking at the cross and being reminded. It was a place of resurrection where they came up out of the Jordan. They passed through it, but it says they came up out of the Jordan, just like it talks about when Jesus was baptized and they came up out of the water. And we talked about that a little bit. And then yesterday we talked about renunciation. It was a place where circumcision was resumed. It was a illustration of man's weakness and God's strength. And we need to remember that we need to rely on God's strength and to renounce our own self-sufficiency. But then there's a fourth thing about this, and that is that this place, Gilgal, was a place of restoration. There were some things that were restored there in Gilgal for the children of Israel. And Joshua chapter 5 and verse 10. Joshua 5 and verse 10 says this, that on the evening of the 14th day of the month, boy, so specific, on the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal, do you get that? They're still at Gilgal. On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. Now, you say, Dick, why would that be, so odd or so? They always celebrated Passover. Well, the truth is, the Passover had only been celebrated twice before. Once when they were out of Egypt, and once more on Mount Sinai, the feast of fellowship and remembrance and worship of God was held. But all the other times when they could have celebrated and worshiped with the Passover feast, this Passover feast of fellowship and remembrance and worship had been abandoned, and it was abandoned by God's command. He said they were not to observe it. And the reason was because they had become disobedient and rebellious to God. Now listen, let me tell you something. As long as there is disobedience in your life, there will never be any true worship. While you're remaining in disobedience, it's going to be impossible for you to worship the Lord. I remember some of the kids at Brother Mike's funeral, as they'd grown up into adults, were remembering some things that they had learned. And I heard my daughter say something about something she had learned there with Life Action that was there and during Mike's time with us. And one of the things they had learned was delayed obedience is disobedience. And the other thing that was obedience brings destruction. Disobedience brings destruction. And folks, that's what was happening with the Israelites. They had rebelled against God. And because they had rebelled against God, it was impossible for them to worship in spirit and in truth. And I'm telling you, as long as there's disobedience in our lives, then there's never going to be any true worship. And there's never going to be any true feasting on the Lord's presence. Even though He's with you in your disobedience, you can't worship Him in your disobedience. Repentance has to come first. And for the children of Israel, that had come. And so God here restores something for them. They had forfeited the joy of worship, and now God brings it back. And it says the Israelites celebrated the Passover. At Gilgal, God restored their ability to worship. I want to ask you a question. I ask myself the question. Are you just going through the motions while remaining in your disobedience? You go through the motions of worshiping the Lord? Or is there true worship, like the Israelites celebrated the Passover after so many years of not being able to? True repentance will result in true worship. God will restore the joy of worship. That's what he did at Gilgal. And that's what he'll do at your Gilgal and my Gilgal, wherever we find it. So God bless you, and let him restore the joy of your worship. So you're not just going through the motions, but it's real adoration. It's real celebration. It's real worship when you come before his presence. God bless you. We'll see you in the morning as we wrap up this portion of Joshua. Thank you for joining us today. God bless you.